it's time for me to ask Ken Rosenthal some trade deadline questions. An absolute legend of the game, an MLB insider, one of the guys that's just in the middle of everything at the trade deadline. He hardly sleeps during the trade deadline, which we talk about. So here he is, Ken Rosenthal. Ken, thanks so much for joining me, man.
Hey, Ben, good to be with you, man.
Of course. So let me ask you this. I have now been working in baseball for 1 year. So for me, this was the craziest deadline ever. I'm also a huge fan of the game and have been my whole life, and I feel like this may have been the craziest baseball deadline ever. So my question here is, you've been working in baseball for a long time. Where does this stand in the craziest trade deadlines of all time?
It's right there. And Ben, one thing that changed in 2019 was the elimination of the August waiver period. So there can be no more deals in August now, the way there used to be. And we saw some big deals in August, including your brother a couple of years back. So that has changed the dynamic. And in 19, we saw 22 trades on deadline day. This year, we saw 21. But the period leading up to it, the 6 days leading up to it, were more frenzied. And I think there were 42 trades in all over those 6 days. So if you ask, was this the craziest deadline ever? Quite possibly, not just because of the number, and the number was big, but 9 All-Stars were traded. We saw 2 teams that won the World Series in the last 5 years essentially deconstruct, the Cubs and the Nationals. And there was just a lot of movement. Some prospects, big prospects were traded as well. So if you put it all together, you want to make a case for this being the craziest one ever? You certainly can.
So you mentioned the Dodgers and and my brother. So I want to ask you that. Back in 2017, when my brother was traded, it was at the waiver deadline. So it was at the end of August.
Yes.
So the Dodgers trade for Max Scherzer this year, which in 2017, they had the option to go get my brother. It was certainly on the table.
Yes, they did.
And they chose not to. They ultimately chose to go get a guy like Yu Darvish. And I don't know, it's my opinion, and maybe it's because I'm related to him, that could have cost them the World Series. If they go get my brother, could be a whole different ball game, and they could have won the World Series in 2017. Does that play a factor in them being as aggressive as they were this year and going to get a guy like Max Scherzer, the cream of the crop of pitchers on the market this year, and giving up a boatload of talent to get him?
That's a really good question. And I don't know that one thing has anything to do with the other, whether the Verlander non-trade led to the Scherzer trade. They've always been, under Friedman, pretty aggressive at the deadline. Machado, the 1 year, remember? Darvish, of course, as you mentioned. Now, I remember the year your brother was traded. He wasn't pitching all that well come July 31st. I think in August, if I'm not mistaken, he started picking it up again. But yeah, if they had traded from him in 17, who knows what might have happened? Because of course, the team that beat them in the World Series would not have gotten it, right? So that's one aspect of it. And then, of course, the sign stealing, that's a whole other equation that we have to enter into it. But I do believe, Ben, your basic point is right, that teams are informed by what has happened in the past, good and bad. And Andrew Friedman often has been someone, even in Tampa Bay, who went for the top of the market. And Tampa Bay is still doing this. They still go for the best players, even if it's going to take something crazy to get them. And that started with Friedman. So maybe in 17, he didn't view Verlander the same way he views Scherzer now. I don't know. Yeah. But it's interesting to look back on it in that fashion.
Certainly. So they end up with Max Scherzer and Trey Turner. How does that even happen? Does one GM call the other and look here, I want Max Scherzer, I also want Trey Turner. How can this go down? Like, how does a deal that big for one, I understand Max, but Trey Turner is a younger guy, a piece that you could build around. How does that even happen? Or is it just something that evolves as talk move on?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how this went down yet. We haven't learned all of those details yet. My guess is that when the talks started, they were solely about Scherzer. And at that point, maybe the Nationals said, well, we want Keibert Ruiz, we want Josiah Gray, those kinds of top prospects. And the Dodgers perhaps countered and said, well, if you're going to want those guys, we want Turner too. And that would be a logical evolution of those talks. Now, I'm not sure how it went down. Maybe the Dodgers from the start said, we want both. And it's very possible that that is how it all came about. But for that quality of prospect, and those are two top 100 guys, I could see definitely the Dodgers saying, not for a rental. We're not giving you two guys like
Right.
that for a rental. But if you include Turner, okay, we'll talk about it, because Turner, of course, is under control through next season as well.
Right. How close were the Padres to actually getting Max Scherzer? Because that was the talk around baseball for a good few hours, and then we heard, hold up, maybe not. And then it just kind of went away until he was now on the Dodgers. How close was that to happening?
Well, Ben, you're hitting a sore spot, because that was my report, and I did say it was close. And I know a lot of Padre fans are upset that it didn't happen, because I did report that it was close to happening. Now, I still have not unraveled this whole thing yet, but at the time I was told it was close, and I was told by multiple people involved that it was close. That's not to say done, and we all know there's a difference between close and done. That's okay. But for whatever reason, it did not happen. Now, again, I still, in my reporting, have not completely figured out what exactly went down here. But we do know this. We know that Scherzer preferred to go to one of the three West Coast National League teams, and NL West teams, the Giants, the Dodgers, or the Padres. So certainly there were discussions that were held. Sometimes the definition of close is in the eye of the beholder. One team might view it as close and the other team might not. But again, there's still a lot of questions out there for me as I kind of continue to look into this, put it that way.
Yeah. So the Cubs, a total teardown, total overhaul, getting rid of some legends, some guys that broke the curse. Have you ever seen a teardown quite like what they went through?
I don't know that I've ever seen it at the deadline like this. And that was what kind of distinguished this. Now, the reason it happened is obvious. They had all these players on expiring contracts, Rizzo and Bryant and Baez, and even some of the others, Jock Peterson and Andrew Chafin. All of these guys were potential free agents. Kimbrel, he has another year on his deal if you pick up the $16 million club option, which frankly, if he's performing at this level, is a great price for him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no brainer. So that is what drove this. Of course, when they were winning this season, when they looked like they might contend, I don't know that this was in the cards, but once they lost those 11 straight, that was it. And the one thing that surprised me was that they went to the extent that they did, that they did not keep Rizzo and Baez, for example, as potentially those guys they could extend later. But in their view, and Jed Hoyer has been pretty vocal about this, their president of baseball operations, they took their best shots with extensions, and none of these guys were willing to sign for what the Cubs thought was a fair price. So that is what also drove this. And that's why in the end, Hoyer said, you know what, I'm not signing these guys. I'm not going to get enough back on a qualifying offer, because the Cubs would only get a pick after the second round, not the first, because they're not a revenue sharing recipient. So that was the decision he made. That was the one element of the whole thing that surprised me, that they went to that length, burned it all down instead of keeping a few pieces and hoping to re-sign them, which of course they could still do in free agency, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I'm totally with you there. So Ken, let me ask you this. I want to know this from your perspective. What does the week leading up to the deadline, the 48 hours leading up to the deadline look like for you? Do you sleep ever?
I do sleep, and certain years not as much, because there is stuff that sometimes goes on at 3 and 4 in the morning that I'm getting hold of and kind of chasing. But this year I actually did sleep the 2 nights before, but it's not a great sleep because you're just wired. And I know a lot of the GMs did not sleep, and because they're so busy, especially the Cubs, the Nationals, the teams that were really involved in a lot of things, the Rangers, the Twins, and some of the buyers as well. But it's very hectic. It's a zillion text messages. It's a couple of phone calls in there as well. I've got TV responsibilities at MLB Network, as well as writing responsibilities for The Athletic and tweeting and all of that. So it's crazy. And the only thing I equate it to when the deadline is over is like the last day of school letting out. Now, not that the work is over because I'm still working and still writing stuff, but it's that kind of relief, I would say, that it's over and you can go back to a more normal, if you want to call it that, existence.
Yeah. So I want to ask you this, and I don't know, where this stands, but as an outsider looking at this situation, I'm always interested in this and truly do not know the answer. Is there ever situations where GMs kind of play the game a little bit at the deadline, if you will, and put some feelers out there, hoping another team hears it to get more back? I've always been so interested in that, and don't know if it's, I assume it's considered like taboo, but I also assume it has to happen at points.
You mean through the media?
Yes, through the media.
It definitely happens. And it's our job to protect against that and to sense when it's happening and to check well enough to see that it's not happening. Now, in the wake of the Scherzer report and not knowing exactly what happened, I'm not exactly sure
Right.
if I was maybe in that position.
Mhm.
And I, again, wrote about this the other day in The Athletic, trying to explain where I was. It does happen. And the only thing I can say about it is, Ben, it's our job to filter through this and get through all the noise and get the stories and facts right. So when I said it was close, I believe what I had at that time, the information I had, that it was close. But whether it actually was or not, I'm still not sure.
Yeah.
And whether I was given information by at least one person under some kind of false pretense, I'm not sure. But it doesn't matter. There's no excuse for someone like me to ever get played.
Interesting.
Period.
Interesting. It just feels like it has to happen, and so I've always been very interested in it. So
people can try. People try all the time.
That's what I was. So people try, and from what I understand, it's your job, and it's your job to be able to see or try and see that that's happening, and say, "Hold on, let's hold off here." So let me ask you this: who won the trade deadline?
Dodgers, certainly.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can look at it any other way. They acquired two of the best players in the game and solidified themselves against two division rivals that did not get those players. Now, the Giants recovered quite nicely with Bryant. The Padres already had acquired Frazier, and then they got Daniel Hudson and Marisnik. But the Padres did not get a starting pitcher. And the Dodgers got a guy who in the 19 World Series was just heroic. So they're clearly winners. I thought the Yankees were winners simply because they addressed one of their biggest problems, which is a lack of left-handed presence in their lineup. With Gallo and Rizzo, they get Gallo for next year as well. They even got money to cover the salaries of both those players for the teams that traded them. So they did really well, in my opinion. I can go down the list. The Blue Jays, they gave up a lot for Barrios, but getting Barrios was a big deal. And that was a big moment for them. And of course, they returned to Toronto on the same day, deadline day. And that was a huge thing. They've been on the road for almost 2 years. It's been something that we haven't talked about enough. So those are the ones that off the top of my head jump out. The Brewers with Willie Adames back in May. You cannot dismiss that. That was a huge move. The White Sox getting Kimbrel and certainly Cesar Hernandez, excellent. Those are the ones that stand out the most.
Well, it was, as well, I think it was just an awesome trade deadline for baseball because as well as some of the buyers did, some of the sellers did equally as well. You think it could potentially end up great for them. But it was certainly an exciting deadline, and you were right in the thick of it and absolutely killing it as you always do. So, Ken, thank you so much for joining me, talking a little bit of trade deadline, and good luck the rest of the season. I appreciate you joining me, man.
Thanks, Ben. Take care.
Thanks for watching. If you love flipping bats, swinging 3-0, or just talking ball, join us. Call us at 213-537-9339 with your questions. We have a weekly guest, and we have a lot of fun, so hit that subscribe button.